Thank you. Well, good afternoon, young scholars. Good afternoon. Mr. Spencer asked me to come and speak to you folks today, do a lecture on chemistry and physics. So we're going to start out with molecular formation, okay? Nah, we're here for hypnosis, right? That's the only reason you guys are there. My name is Anthony Galie. I do not know how many of you know who I am or what it is I do. I suspect many of you have seen the YouTube videos. I am a hypnotist. I was doing corporate work for almost 40 years. I started out as a hypnotherapist, helping people stop smoking and lose weight, and then I ended up going into the corporate field where I would train people how to get and stay focused on their goals, and one of the techniques that I would teach them was self-hypnosis. And to demonstrate it at conferences and conventions, I'd actually bring people up and do a demonstration. It was different. I believe I'm one of the very few that ever did it, if not the first, and it was a terrific career. I got to travel all over the world, been to every state in this country multiple times, made a lot of money, did very well. It was a great, fun way of making a living, and I'm kind of stepping off the stage now. I have known Lisa Gilbert, who is a good friend of your teacher, Mr. Spencer. I've known Lisa for a long, long time, 38, 39 years, and I guess it was 2002. She was in the psych department down in Boynton Beach. She gave me a call. She said, Anthony, would you speak to my advanced placement psych class? You know, do maybe a little demonstration, tell them what hypnosis is all about, because we have a chapter on altered states. And I think, you know, you would be excellent. The class was 15, 20 people. I remember we were sitting in the classroom, and I answered their questions and did a little presentation, hypnotized a couple kids. Next year, she calls back, you know, a couple of other teachers wanted to join their classes. Would you have any objection? No. One thing led to another, and I have spoken at that school 16 years in a row. It is the only high school that I've ever spoken to. In all the hundreds, if not thousands of speeches I've given, I have spoken to one high school up until today. You guys are the second high school that I will ever speak to. So, since this is probably going to get posted at some level on YouTube, let's let them know who you are. This is Suncoast High School, Riviera Beach, Florida, correct? Suncoast. And your teacher is Dennis Spencer. Now tell me the name of the school. Suncoast. Yeah, I screwed that up already. Okay, well, I'll edit that out of the video. How's that sound? All right, since this is the second school, let's get you guys on YouTube. I want to thank you guys here at Suncoast High School in Riviera Beach for having me come and speak to your group. Mr. Dennis Spencer. I'll edit that out. And what I usually do for Ms. Gilbert's class, and what I intend to do for you folks this afternoon, since this is an advanced placement class, I would like to share with you some information, teach you a little bit about this altered state, which we call hypnosis. I have been studying it since I was a young boy, well in excess of a half a century. I have read dozens, if not hundreds of books on it, have hypnotized tens of thousands of people, so many people would consider me an expert in the field, and since you have me at your advantage here this afternoon, I was hoping to give you some insight, at least from my point of view, as to what hypnosis actually is, how it works, and why you guys might want to learn to do it as a technique for focusing on your studies, relaxation, correcting personal habits or study habits, etc. And I felt like I wanted to open up here this afternoon by asking anyone in the audience, does anyone in this room have a definition of hypnosis? What you might think it is? Is anyone willing to venture a guess? Anyone? Someone put their hand up who thinks they have a definition. Sir, if you were going to define hypnosis, what would it be? Sure. When someone controls how you think. Okay? Well, any hypnotist worth their salt is pretty much going to tell you that a hypnotist really doesn't control thinking as much as focus thinking. You don't even control your own thinking as much as you may like to think you do. For example, as you're listening to me now, you're quite unaware of what your left foot feels like, and now you're all completely aware of it, and there's not a thing you can do to stop that. You see, you're not as much in control of your thinking as you think you are. I had mentioned to Dennis on the way over here that I had read a book back in the 70s by a Princeton philosopher, and we were talking about the new MRI and the PET scans where psychology has advanced so far from when I came up in the 70s. And the book I had read in the 70s, the man postulated that from what he understood of consciousness, he predicted that someday we would discover definitive proof that most of the decisions you make, where you think you are consciously making a decision, should I go left or right, that decision has already been made at a different level of your mind before you consciously even have a chance to choose it. He predicted this back in the 70s, and they've just come out last year with some MRIs that definitively prove that. So controlling your thinking is not what hypnosis, guiding it, structuring it, putting a barrier to a degree around it, but you can't really control thinking. Anybody else have a definition? Yes, ma'am. Guiding, where does it go? I would go along with that. She said going into your subconscious and kind of guiding where it goes. I would agree with that. I would use slightly different terminology. Systematically setting conditions that bring about a desired response. Interesting thing, and I'll use the term subconscious mind, but I want to forewarn most of you. That term is becoming passé as people are becoming more and more aware of what the mind, consciousness, hypnosis really is. They are drifting away from this old construct of having a conscious and a subconscious mind. They are drifting much more toward an integrated interaction between different parts of your brain. But to use that as a model, systematically setting conditions. When you're talking about the subconscious mind, it follows certain rules that are different than what we would consider classic consciousness. And one of those rules is you really can't make it do anything. Have you ever lay in bed at night, you have a test the next day, want to get to sleep, try to make it happen, got to get to sleep, got to get to sleep. What happens when you're trying to go to sleep? Harder you try, less likely it becomes. When do you fall asleep? When you stop trying, right? And then you're out like a light, you know? Try not to think of elephants for the next 5 seconds, you know? Dun, 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 dun. You can't do that. You cannot, by trying at the conscious level, at the unconscious level, right, almost always gives you the opposite result. So you can't force it to do anything, but you can set conditions for the desired response to happen. Let's go back to the example of falling asleep at night. You can't lay there and make yourself go to sleep. But most of you in this room have certain conditions. Maybe you have to be on your certain side, certain pillow. Some people count sheep. Mentally, they go somewhere in their mind. Most of us have this kind of like checklist where they set conditions. And what they're signaling to their mind is, all right, I'm ready to go to sleep. And then many people, if they have no problem going to sleep, drift right off because they can set the conditions for it to happen, but they cannot make it happen. And that's precisely what happens with hypnosis. You cannot force a person into a hypnotic state. And the reason I say that, I'll give you an example, is a very common example of a everyday, quote unquote, hypnotic state is daydreaming. And you cannot make yourself daydream. If you sit there and say, I'm going to go into a daydream, again, the harder you try, you get the opposite response. However, put you in biology class. 5 minutes later, you're a million miles away, right? You can, certain conditions, certain people, certain times of day, certain situations. So I agree with what you say, that by controlling or structuring an environment, you can bring forth. And the interesting thing is that we are coming more and more to the view that you're not creating anything when you hypnotize someone. That hypnosis, and for lack of a better word, the trance, is there all the time. You don't create a hypnotic state. You bring out what is there all along. And in order to bring it out, what most hypnotic inductions really are is inhibiting consciousness. When you're conscious, when you're analyzing a problem, when you're thinking about something in a deliberate, cogent manner, you're inhibiting that daydream, drifting, trance-like state. And if you ever look at any of the classic hypnotic inductions, where a hypnotist will say, pick a spot, take a deep breath, listen just to my voice, focus on whatever. What the hypnotist is doing is he's taking that conscious part of you and boxing it up. Pick one spot, concentrate on your breathing, think of these numbers, focusing it down, and at some point it inhibits consciousness So much so that out comes what was there all along. So you're not really creating hypnosis as much as allowing it to come out. It's there right now. And I know most of you don't believe that. And usually I bring someone up on the stage, but this stage really isn't set up to show the whole group. So I'll use someone as an example. Madam, your first name what would be? Maddie? Can I ask you a simple question, Maddie? Do you know how to spell the word psychoanalysis? Come back here for a second. I got a different question for you. Can you remember the name of the person that sat in front of you in 8th grade? Come on back here for a second. Now, I'm asking Maddie questions that require her to access her long-term memory. What we used to say, go into your subconscious mind to find it. In order for her to access that information, because you see, spelling a complicated word or remembering a distant memory is not something we typically carry around in our conscious memory. In order for her to access that information, she stopped looking at me, stared off into space, and the best I could tell, you were staring just in about the area of that flag. Do you remember doing that, Maddie? You're doing it again. Come on back. And that's the point. We all do this thousands of times a day. When Maddie looked away from me to try to remember that event or to spell that word, let me explain in detail what was happening. She was looking at the flag, but she wasn't seeing the flag. She was probably seeing the word psychoanalysis. Had I been talking to her while she was in that state of mind, she wouldn't have heard what I was saying. Now, she would have popped right back out and kind of been able to fill it in. We're always filling in the gaps. But while she was in that state, she was, for all intents and purposes, in a trance. And you see this in everyday activity all the time. I do it, we all do it. Just observe someone for the next 24 hours in conversation while you're talking to anyone and watch their eye movements. And you will see people frequently lose it, get it back again, drift in and out, stare off into space. I have always maintained that if somehow you could put a GoPro on or somehow walk around with a stopwatch and clock the amount of time that the average person spends conscious in the here and now, aware of what they're doing, as opposed to staring out into space, not seeing what they're looking at, not hearing what's going on around them, you'd see that the average person spends far more time in a trance-like state than they do fully conscious. And this stuff comes out in everyday experience. How many of you in the room drive? Have you ever driven past your exit yet on I-95? Drive right past your exit? How do you manage that stunt? How do you drive past a 15-foot high sign? This is your exit. And you go right past without even seeing it. Do you think you were fully conscious when you did that? Have you ever pulled into your driveway at the end of the day, shut off the ignition, and you seriously have to sit there and ask yourself, how did I get here? Which road did I take? Was that light red when I went through it? Have you ever had that experience? And then, of course, you get out of your car and you go into your home. Lo and behold, there's a member of your family in a trance. Totally zapped out in front of the TV set or one of your siblings in front of a video game. You walk into the room, you talk to them, you call their name, they do not even know you're in the room. And as I mentioned earlier, perhaps the most common example of this trance-like state is the everyday daydream. And all you really have to do is go into any biology class and you'll see half the class staring out into space, somewhere else. And here's what most people do at that time. Most people spend most of their lives thinking about what they should have done, could have done, might have done, what they think they're going to do, what they hope they're going to do, what they wish is going to happen. And in fact, they pay very little attention to what they are actually doing. We drift in and out. We feel like we are continuously conscious. Ask most people, how long have you been conscious? Well, since I woke up this morning. Not true. All you have to do is watch them and see they're drifting in and out of these states thousands of times a day. So I do not see hypnosis or the trance as anything odd or strange or foreign. I see it as a very natural state of mind. And yet, most people are mystified by it because they don't understand the rules or the principles that are involved. Turns out, when you effortlessly focus 100% of your attention in a daydream, you tend to become a bit more suggestible. And I'll give you an example of suggestibility. Have you ever seen a number of people tranced out in front of a TV set, totally absorbed in Game of Thrones or something? One person yawns, and the yawn goes through the whole room. You can watch it waving through the room. Now, there's an example of a suggestion, yawning, that goes right into their mind. They're doing it without thinking about it, analyzing it, or criticizing it. It goes right into their mind, and they're acting upon it without any critical analysis whatsoever. It's interesting. It's a very calm state of mind. There's nothing scary about it. And it can be used. This is the beauty of it. Have you ever thought, well, why did nature put that kind of state of mind there? It turns out to be an extremely adaptive thing. I'll give you a few examples. This ability to operate autonomically, automatically, tends to have huge evolutionary advantages. If you're trying to learn how to type, you sit down, get a book or a teacher, look down at the keyboard, maybe for the first time in your life, try to figure out where the keys are, put your hands the way they tell you to put, and you start typing. Where's the Q, where's the E, where's the W? You start typing. And you do it repetitiously. You do it over and over again, and if you practice long enough, you become somewhat of a proficient typist. And if you practice long enough, you might be able to type rather quickly. You have taken what at first was a very conscious, very deliberate thing, and through repetition, you have put it now into a different part of your mind, that autonomic, subconscious part of your mind. Now here's the paradox. If you're typing, and it's in your unconscious mind, and you stop and think, where's the Q, where's the E, where's the W, you screw up. In other words, at first you had to be very aware of where it was, and then once it gets in there, you don't want to be aware of where it is. That's the adaptive part. I'll give you another example. Let's say you're trying to learn how to play tennis. You hire a tennis coach, or a friend teaches you how to play tennis. Here's how you set your feet. Here's how you hold the racket. Here's how you track the ball. Here's how your swing should go. You learn tennis. And you practice and get better and better at it. And if you keep practicing, at some point you get quite good at it. Well, if you're quite good at playing tennis, and that ball comes over the net at 50 or 60 miles an hour, you better not have to sit there and think, where should I put my feet? How should I be holding the racket? What's my swing now? Ball's gone, right? You do something repetitiously, it becomes autonomic. Think about, you said most of you drive a car? Think about the simple, yet incredibly complicated act of driving a car. Many of you can drive down, driving a car, straight down I-95. Let's say there's not even any turns, or you're not even looking for directions. You're driving straight down I-95. But while you're driving, you're constantly readjusting that steering wheel ever so slightly to keep it in the middle lane. You're constantly lifting and putting down your foot on the gas pedal. Friend might be in the car, you might be having a conversation with that person or listening to a song on the radio. At the same time, you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner and the test you got next week. All those things happening. It's incredibly complex, and most of it entirely automatic, entirely autonomic. You're not even aware you're doing it. Your mind has a tremendous ability to adapt to its environment, and this automatic type of thinking is a hugely adaptive measure. Two more quick examples and I'll totally move on. I happen to wear eyeglasses. I notice a number of you in the room are wearing eyeglasses. When I put my glasses on, within 10 minutes, I am no longer conscious of the pane of glass between me and the rest of you. I look right through this pane of glass and don't even see it anymore. I negatively hallucinate it. If you know someone that works in a factory or in a loud building, if you walk in, you can't hear anything. You have to scream, hey, ask a person that works in a factory and they'll tell you, within a week or so, they're in that loud, noisy factory, they can hear a pin drop. At an unconscious level, they're readjusting, tuning out, you're constantly readjusting to your environment. And that's the adaptive part of it, that programmable part of you. Unfortunately, some of us program in things that we either shouldn't or shouldn't put in there or really don't want in there, like cigarette smoking. When I was your age, that was it, that was a cool thing you did to rebel. Probably still is to some degree, but you'd sneak off and you'd smoke cigarettes. And I don't know how many of you in this room have ever smoked a cigarette, but the very first time you smoke a cigarette, your body could not be giving you more signals, don't do this. You cough, you choke, it's awful, you get dizzy, it's a really unpleasant experience, isn't it? I mean, what are you, crazy? And yet, you want to be like one of the people or whatever the peer pressure might happen to be, so you force yourself to do it over and over and over again. What happens to any behavior that becomes repetitious? Rapidly gets relegated to that autonomic system. You do it for 10, 15, 20 years. Big part of my business when I was a hypnotherapist is these 40, 50-year-old people help me stop. I don't want to do this anymore. It's awful. I mean, I got to wake up in the morning choking. It's expensive. Nobody else I know smokes. I feel like I'm ostracized, and I can't stop. I've programmed myself so deeply into this, it now is kind of beyond my conscious control. So what do you think works to help people stop smoking? Hypnosis tends to be somewhat effective for helping people stop smoking. Show them how to deliberately set the conditions to bring out that autonomic trance-like state where suggestibility is heightened. Give them suggestions to see themselves as a person who used to smoke and doesn't smoke anymore, to visualize themselves going through the day without grabbing a cigarette. And many of these people come out of that trance-like state with the ability now to not smoke. It's a paradox, because getting into a trance certainly looks like a lower level of control, doesn't it? Tell someone they're stuck to the chair and they can't get up. Tell someone, if you've ever seen the YouTube things, give them a challenge and they can't do it. It looks like that person's out of control. It looks like a lower level of control. And yet, by going to that lower level of control, many people come out of it able to stop smoking, control their nail biting, improve their study habits. It's a paradox, but you find it throughout many philosophies. You have to die in order to be reborn. You have to give in order to get. Over and over in philosophy, this idea of, sacrificing to a lower level of control to ultimately gain a higher level. So that's where it becomes therapeutic. And it's fascinating as could be. I've loved every single minute of doing it. So that's kind of the background. Dennis also, Mr. Spencer also specifically asked me, because I asked him, is there any particular topic that I can address that would really help these folks or be relevant to them? And he sent me an email. Some of these kids are under tremendous pressure. They've got tests to take. This is the magnet school, and some of them have self-induced pressure from their parents, pressure from their teachers. Some of these folks are under real pressure, and some of them have a challenge in learning how to relax or stress management. If you say anything about stress management that would be helpful to them, it's going to help some of the people that you're speaking to. So, with that in mind, let me mention a couple things. First of all, one of the overriding characteristics of being hypnotized, I don't think I've ever hypnotized a person who has not come out of the trance and commented, I feel terrific. I feel like I just slept for 10 solid hours. I just like I had a back rub. It's unbelievable. I haven't been this relaxed in years. It's almost a universal side effect, and I will tell you why. When we do the hypnosis in a few moments, for those of you who do not end up coming up here, those of you still in the audience, I'm going to ask you to pay attention, because what you will notice is that I am showing people how to do two things. How to relax mentally, how to slow their mind down so they're focusing, how to relax mentally, as well as totally relax physically. You are a younger group. As I mentioned, most of my audiences are businesses, so I'm often talking to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old people. And I'll say to many of them, some of you in this room haven't relaxed in years. I'll give them an example. I said, tell me if this is not an average day for many of you business people. You are blasted out of sleep first thing in the morning by the sound of your iPhone or an alarm clock. You get downstairs, you have breakfast, most of it highly processed food, total garbage. You get behind the wheel of a car and you drive to work. Most people don't recognize it, but just the act of driving a car incorporates 8 to 9 life or death decisions per minute. You're used to doing it, but you're taking your life in your hand when you push that 3-ton thing around. You get to work, high stress job, you plow back through the city traffic again, sit down and eat a highly processed, chemical-filled dinner, and then plant yourself in front of a TV and watch sex and violence for 5 to 6 hours on the average. Go to bed and start the whole process over again. I joke, I say some of you haven't relaxed in years. So one of the reasons why you might want to learn self-hypnosis is that almost universally, people that experience it say, this is complete relaxation. And as I mentioned, if you pay attention, you'll see why, because it's mental as well as physical relaxation. So I have these CDs and DVD sets that I sell to businesses and groups. One of my CDs is a CD titled Deep Relaxation, and it has 2 tracks on it. One track describes how to use it, what it's all about. The second track is an actual start-to-finish hypnotic induction designed to reduce stress. Pick a spot, get you into hypnosis, gives you a suggestion for relaxing, and bring you out of it. When I get home tonight, I'm going to send Mr. Spencer the link to that MP3 file. I converted the CD to an MP3 file, and you'll have 2 of them. The first file just tells you how to use it. The second file will be a start-to-finish deep relaxation induction. It takes about 15, 20 minutes, word of caution, you do not want to be listening to this driving your car, mowing your lawn, flying an airplane, operating a buzzsaw. You absolutely don't want to be doing this while you're doing something else. But if you do have any stress, I can state without qualification, I had 18 one-hour-long CDs that I used to sell, and of all the different titles that I had out on the market, this deep relaxation tape, I got more unsolicited comments about this than any product I ever made. I would get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know you'd answer the phone. Well, who do you think's going to answer my phone? I just listened to the tape. It's the most amazing tape I've ever. I would get calls all the time from people that this just is incredible, wipes me out. I will send Mr. Spencer the file. It will be up to him as to who, but it's his choice. He can dispense it to all of you if he wishes, but it will have an actual start to finish induction on it. I recommend either download it on your iPhone or convert it to a CD or something. Listen to it perhaps at night or maybe first thing in the morning, and you will have an organized way to relax. So I can help you in that direction. I can also hopefully help you in one other direction, which is give you a little understanding about what stress is. A lot of people actually don't give it a whole lot of thought, but stress is often a mental condition in terms of the way you are perceiving things. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it's physical. If you're out in the cold, if you are starving, if you're addicted to something, that's physical stress. But there's also mental stress, and they tend to have the same effects on the body. That was revealed at the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, by a researcher named Galie. Galie did some very groundbreaking work in stress. He wanted to know, first of all, what are the physical effects of stress? So he took different animals, different groups of animals, and I'll share with you what he did to the rats. He would raise rats in a cage that had a shock grid, and at random, he'd put little shocks through their feet. Well, I can tell you, they hate it. Stresses the heck out of them. Physical stress. He would raise the rats in those stress-filled conditions, sacrifice the animal, dissect, and ask, what is different from a normal rat? He saw enlarged hearts, hardening of the arteries, more cholesterol, a whole slew of chemical changes. He delineated, this is what physical stress does to these rats. And the question was, what does mental stress do? You know how he answered that question? He raised a group of rats in cages next to cats. Want to talk about mental stress? Raised them to maturity, sacrificed them, dissected them. What do you think he found? Virtually identical results. Mental stress can be just as destructive to your body as physical stress over the long haul. And I want to explain that over the long haul comment. Your body is incredible in its ability to defend itself. I mean, if you think of the microbes and the viruses and the radiation and the things your body defends itself against as a normal course, it's truly unbelievable. You have amazing ability to defend yourself, but it does have limits. And I don't know if you know what the fight or flight response is, but if you were in a dark alley and a couple German shepherds come around in the corner attacking you, you'd feel the stress. You'd feel your body come alert. That's normal. But it needs to let go and relax. What people don't realize in the culture that we live in, it's like the frog in the boiling water. There's just more and more and more stress added. You're not aware of it, the deadlines, the tests, the studying, and you don't kind of notice it, but you start tensing up and you start living in this stress-filled bubble and never let it go. And the theory is not that it's the stress that causes the problems as much as if you don't recharge your defenses, they start weakening. They start breaking down, and that's what makes you susceptible to the problems, the illnesses, and the disease. And that came from a very famous study in 1980 where they studied air traffic controllers. Air traffic controlling is a real stress-filled job, and you need a very, very narrow skill set to be hired. In order to be an air traffic controller, you have to have an incredible skill set in visuospatial processing. You have to be so much in terms of engineering, intelligence. You have to have a very fixed, very rare skill set before you are even hired. So that most of these air traffic controllers on paper look very similar. Same skill set, same intelligence level, same emotional ability. On paper, they looked pretty much identical. But some of them were dying of stress-related problems, getting addicted to drugs, alcohol, ulcers, and some of them seemed to thrive. And it confused researchers. On paper, these guys people look identical. What's the difference? So they did detailed interviews, and I'm gonna summate it in a very short period, but here's basically what they found. They would talk to the people that were experiencing all the stress. What do you think about your job? Oh my God, hundreds of people in each of these planes. All I got to do is make one mistake and I'm killing hundreds of people. And actually, the way they looked at what they were doing was scaring the heck out of them and causing the stress. And then on the other end of the curve, and I read 5 or 6 of the interviews, and the one that I will never forget, the people that were not affected by it. This was in the 80s. I look at it like a big Pac-Man game. Try to make sure the monster doesn't eat them. That's what he was sitting there playing video games in his mind. So one person is seen as, oh my goodness, what if they die? It's going to be a total, totally frightening thing. The other person's playing video games in his head. That's why they weren't experiencing stress. It was the way they were looking at it. So if you are in a situation where you do feel physical stress mounting, and you may very well be, there's no getting around some of the stresses that you're being subjected to, one thing that can often make a huge difference is if you back up and ask yourself, is there another way I can look at this? Can I look at this as a challenge? Can I look at this as a game? Can I look at this as fun? Can I look at this as different? Can I look at this as I'm going to stick it to the man? Whatever it is, try to look at it from a different point of view, and you may very well get a totally different response in terms of stress. I was specifically asked to address that concept with you, so I did. Back to the hypnosis. You may be wondering what these chairs are doing up here, and I'm sure you all know. In a few moments, I'm going to invite a few of you up here, join me on stage. I'd like to do a demonstration of hypnosis for you. I will explain what I'm going to do and exactly why I am doing it. How many of you are familiar with the bell curve, Gaussian curve, normal distribution? Good. Then it should come as no surprise that hypnotic suggestibility follows the bell curve almost perfectly. If I were in front of a random group of 100 people, and it looks to me I'm in front of a random group of about 100 people, this is what the bell curve predicts. 68% of you, that big mass in the middle, will be average hypnotic subjects. Can be hypnotized, can stop smoking, lose weight, control pain, but usually over a course of 2, 3, or 4 sessions. It doesn't happen instantly. You're going to have 5 to 15% of you that are difficult to hypnotize, really tough, all the way down to about 2.14% that, for all practical intents and purposes, are simply never going to experience a hypnotic trance. They're the exception to the rule. And then you get the other side of the curve. 5 to 15% that are better than average, really good, and then phenomenal. Who do you think I want up here if I had a choice? Obviously. For a good demonstration, for dramatic effects, to make things better for all of us, if I have a choice, I'm going to try to find out which of you are into that last 5%, preferably up to 2.14%. And I'll tell you now, the 2.14% are called floppers for a reason, and if you're lucky, you'll understand that in just a few minutes. Really good hypnotic subject. Next question. All right, if hypnotic suggestibility follows the bell curve, and if you're looking for that top 5, 10%, how do you find them? Well, it turns out it's quite easy. There are dozens of what are called hypnotic suggestibility tests, quite a few of them. But I use 2. There are 2. Each one of these little tests takes less than 5 minutes, and at the end of the second test, we are all going to know who the really good subjects in this room are. Would you all be willing to take these tests? That's what you came here for, right? Okay, first test is incredibly simple. You say, how could this be so simple? But it's very, very revealing in terms of what's known as the mind-body connection. Just what kind of a subject are you likely to be? Would you all take a moment, please? Uncross your feet and legs, put your feet flat on the floor. Perfect. If you want to buzz for a few minutes and let off some of that nervous energy, we can. All right, rest your backs comfortably against the backs of the chair. Perfect. Now I'm going to ask you to make 2 fists, like so. Beautiful. Bring your hands together so that your thumbs and your knuckles are touching like this. Excellent. Rest your arms so they're not in an awkward or an uncomfortable position. Beautiful. And I'm going to ask you simply to extend both of your index fingers, not the little ones, index fingers. That's the one that's far enough out there, right? The index fingers so that they look like 2 little goalposts. Got it? Just like that. Perfect. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Exhale all the way down and begin using your imaginations. With your eyes closed, I'm going to ask you to simply imagine that the tips of your index fingers are magnetized. Imagine that the tips of your index fingers are two powerful magnets. Two magnets that are beginning to pull together. Two magnets that are beginning to draw and tug together, closer and closer, tighter and tighter, until soon they actually touch. Stay focused, guys. Closer and closer until they actually touch. And all I'm going to do is start slowly counting backwards from 3 down to 1. With each number, the fingers will come closer and closer, draw tighter and tighter, and by the time I reach the number 1, if they're not touching already, they will be by then. So feel this happening. 3, feel those fingertips pulling, tugging, drawing together. 2, coming closer and closer, tighter and tighter, as if they were magnets being drawn all the way together. 3, 2, 1, eyes wide open, all the way up here. Can I see by show of hands? How many people got their fingertips all the way together? Totally. Kids, gotta love it. Woo-wee. All right, guys are great. Actually, I was a tiny bit less than honest with you. Hypnotic suggestibility with a large group of random individuals does follow the bell curve perfectly. You guys are not exactly a group of random individuals, you're a group of teenagers. And it turns out that there is an age effect as well. That up until about the age of 8, it's very difficult to hypnotize a child because of what Piaget called reversibility, intellectual development. They have trouble with the metaphors. But as soon as they kick in around 7 or 8, they become real good subjects, and they just keep getting better and better until they reach about 14 to 20. That's probably the most suggestible as an age group, and then they decrease down until they become average. Go back to the bell curve again. And I have a theory as to why that's the case, why you folks would be more suggestible than, let's say, a 25, 30-year-old, 40-year-old person. You don't have mortgages, you don't have to make car payments, you haven't had your heart crushed, you have no kids, you haven't gone through a divorce. All that tends to alter your perception inexorably. You will, soon to come, but at the moment, let's have anything. So you tend to be a little bit more suggestible.